Welcome to Your Hired Radio. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein. You're listening to 96.7 FM Arlington, Virginia. Today, we're going to be talking about being laid off, how to see it coming, and what to do when it happens. I've got very special guests with me, Michelle Vitus. Michelle is the founder and CEO of Slate Advisers. Slate Advisers is a career transition services platform that helps people transition to their next job. Michelle was the director of business development for two venture-backed energy efficiency companies, SCIenergy and SCIenergy?
SCIenergy.
Oh, SCIenergy. Okay. Michelle holds an MBA from Stanford. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Sorry for butchering one of the companies that you work for.
No problem.
And also with me is Tim Wenzel. Tim is passionate about people. He simply loves helping people connect with each other. It's a passion that he discovered when he was one of the first recruiters at PayPal over 20 years ago. This same passion allowed for a successful career helping companies like eBay, PayPal, Tesla, TalkBox, and Chegg maximize their human capital growth potential. In addition to Tim's formal graduate education, he holds an unofficial degree in rainmaking. I love that unofficial degree, Tim. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So it's not uncommon, I'd say in the last 15 or 20 years, for people to get laid off on a regular basis. Companies get bought and sold, industries get evaporated very quickly, and many of us have faced that situation where you're without a job and it happens very spontaneously, so you didn't have a chance to prepare. Michelle, how can someone kind of see this coming? I mean, what are the signs?
Yeah, so there are a number of different early indicators that a layoff might be coming. One is when a company has a decline in performance or is falling short of their projected growth. So you can often see that with a hit to the stock price or other things that might be an indicator that things aren't going as they had planned. Another one is when a company does a shift in their strategy. And a recent example of that is Microsoft. So they just announced a layoff as they focus more resources on their cloud software versus their desktop products. So whenever you have a shift like that, the resources have got to realign with the shift in strategy, and the skills required are often different. And then a third early indicator is often the acquisition. So when two companies merge, there are going to be some positions that are duplicative or get eliminated. So those are some of the major reasons or early indicators that a layoff might be coming.
So we know like a lot of things. Like it sounds like a shift in things happening at work, some kind of major shift. You should be aware that a layoff could be coming. But by then, it's kind of too late to get ready. It's almost like, you need like your emergency preparedness kit, right? Tim, what would that look like? Like, what would I do to kind of always be ready if things don't go well at work?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And really the answer is we should always be networking because, as you mentioned earlier, this is something that happens to most people at least once in their careers. So it's good to always keep your network active. Try to stay in touch with people both on LinkedIn. The LinkedIn groups functionality can be very helpful. Attend meetups, that are relevant to your particular function, and periodically touch base with people that you respect that know your work, including past colleagues and bosses. And then when something does, if you are affected by a layoff, don't panic, but you'll have that network in place to reach out to, and you can be very thoughtful in terms of how you conduct your next job search.
Now, Tim, you talk about a couple of things that I think some of our listeners might not be aware of. One of them you said was LinkedIn groups. So what do you mean by LinkedIn groups?
So on LinkedIn, one of the sections of the platform is called groups, and really what that is a way for professionals to organize around different topics or different corporate functions. So, for example, I think I'm a member of a couple of different groups of recruiters and HR professionals. So that can be a good way to kind of know what's going on and see job opportunities in that direct network.
So it's not enough just to be on LinkedIn, but it's more important maybe to be in a few groups that are related to my field.
That's right. And they'll have ongoing discussion boards within those groups. You might join one for broadcasting, let's say, and you can touch base with other broadcasters and see what's going on in that industry.
And with meetups, if people don't know, it's meetups.com, and it's a platform where people can start up their own little groups in your city on a whole bunch of different topics. There's ones on cooking and hiking and biking and different types of activities where people gather together. I know I have a meetup where I teach interview skills, and I guess what you're suggesting, Tim, is if people join Meetup, and how would they do that? What would they use it for?
Yeah, so you just mentioned a few social examples of meetups, and I think there are also a fair number of professional related meetups where people get together for lunch or happy hour that have something in common, right? And sometimes that might be people that all work in finance, and it's a great way to stay active and just have people be reminded about who you are and what you're good at, and then if you kind of establish that rapport with folks in your industry, then they'll be much more willing to help you when you do get laid off.
Right. And even if there isn't, and maybe if there isn't a meetup in my area for something specific that I'm working on, maybe create my own.
Exactly. That's right.
I have one thing to add to that. I think it's important for people to remember that you got to keep your network alive outside of your current company. So when you're working in a job, it's really easy to be focused on your colleagues and the people that you interact with every day. But the examples Tim gave, I think, are great in that you need to keep that professional network active even when you're employed outside of your company.
And we're going to get into some of the details here, but one of the things that strikes me is that, it's a Tuesday afternoon. I mean, I know this happened to me once. The whole organization got laid off. Should I give myself a cooling off period, or should I just kind of get right in there and try and find my next thing? What do you think?
Oh, that's a great point. I think you've got to take a breather before jumping right into interviews in particular. And most people feel some degree of anger, bitterness, even sadness when they get laid off. And inevitably, you're going to bring that into an interview unless you've had a chance to process it. And that can really doom you. An example of someone I met with, he was a former CIO of a Fortune 1000 tech company, and he had quickly lined up some interviews through his network at some great companies in the week after he was let go. And he told me that ended up being a huge mistake. He blew it in the interviews because he was still upset with how he'd been let go from his prior company. And that negativity came through during the interviews. Unfortunately, he didn't have the luxury of going back to those firms after he cleared his head. So he missed an opportunity.
So how would someone go about processing what happened at there? Is there any particular resource, or you're just saying in general, like how does someone let go of kind of whatever negative feelings they have?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So you've got to have some time, some space to process your emotions so that you don't have that flooded feeling. That said, everybody processes it differently. Some people, time is what heals the wound. For a lot of people, it's helpful to talk it through with a spouse, with a friend, with a career coach even. So a lot of career coaches are good at helping people kind of process what they're feeling around it. And even if you haven't fully let go of how you feel about the situation, it's important that you're ready to talk about it in a way that has a little bit of emotional distance. So you go into an interview and somebody asks, why did you leave your last job? You don't want to either snap back with a story of how you were wronged or break down into tears. You want to keep it short and factual. Right. And say, hey, my company had a layoff and my whole division was impacted. I'm using this as an opportunity to move into a high growth org. Something like that, where it's like this is what happened. It's short, it's factual, and I'm moving on. So you don't have to have it completely processed, but you need to be able to distance yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And Tim, if we're going to need time, how would somebody prepare financially for the possibility of layoff? And that's, I mean, it can happen to anybody at any economic level.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's some data out there that states that a huge percentage of our population in the United States lives paycheck to paycheck. So that makes it extra scary. That said, I think, financially, it's good to always try to be saving, have a nest egg, at least a few months worth of salary replacement if possible. Because if you don't have that, then you're going to have a sense of desperation, and that also might negatively impact your chances of getting hired because the employers might sense that. And then you might not have time to go talk to as many companies as you otherwise might. And then you might lose the opportunity to really compare and contrast and understand, what are the differences between the different employers and the different jobs that I might be qualified for.
Let's talk about some of the other things I can do to kind of prepare myself. So now I know both of you have worked at big companies. What are some of the services companies offer at outplacement? Like what will they do to help me through that transition period?
Yeah, so I can speak to that directly. We are a provider of outplacement services, Slate Advisors, and most companies will, especially mid and large-sized companies, will provide what's called outplacement services, which is not a service that acts directly as a recruiter, but it's a service that helps empower you to land your next role. So it typically includes a resume review of your LinkedIn profile, and then career advising, which can be on anything from, hey, where am I headed next? What do I want to do? To how do I prepare for this interview and conduct a network-based job search that goes beyond just applying to roles via job boards. It's that whole suite of services. We go beyond that, and we also do compensation consults to help people benchmark their comp package. We do skill development stuff, offering access to subscriptions for things like lynda.com. So it's a whole suite of services to empower people to land that next role.
And what's lynda.com?
Yeah, lynda.com is actually owned by LinkedIn now, and they have a whole bunch of video-based courses on everything from Microsoft Excel to project management to an obscure video editing tool. Really, almost anything you can think of. They have thousands of online video-based courses. So we encourage people to tap tools like Lynda and other online skill development resources to just be ready to hop into that next role and fill in whatever small gaps they might have.
So it sounds like maybe people should be doing that just day one of the next job, right?
We should always be developing our skills, but it is something where people get busy and you say you're going to do it later and it never comes around. So absolutely, it should be ongoing, but it's often delayed when you're fully employed and not thinking it's urgent.
If my company lays me off, but they don't offer outplacement services, where can I go for that kind of support?
Yeah, so there are private career advisors, there are private resume writing services, et cetera, and they can be really good, but there's also a huge degree of variation. So I think it's important to really get a sense of the particular provider that you're engaging with. Ideally, get a referral from someone who's worked with them in the past. Things like resume reviews or resume overhauls, you would be shocked at the range of pricing that's out there for those type of services. So everything from like $99 to $5,000. Do I think you need to go spend $5,000 on your resume? Absolutely not. So that's that is part of the challenge of engaging that type of service individually. But a referral is a great way to get started. And also you can do some of this by leveraging your network. So I'm a big advocate of people leveraging others in their industry to provide feedback on their resume and LinkedIn profile, leveraging others in the industry that are in their professional networks to give them advice on their job search and help orient them in different ways. So it's not just someone that you hire. It can also be people that are helping you within your network.
Yeah, one of the resources, or two resources I think that are really good is your alumni association or the university that you went to, because there's a career services office there that, they'll help you. They'll help you rewrite your resume. They have job postings, and also local government. Here in Arlington, we have an employment service, group that helps people with their resumes, free career counseling. Also, jobs get posted. So it seems like there's maybe quite a bit of resources available. Tim, do you have anything to add to that?
I would agree with all that, and I would just add that it's also good to have a few good recruiters in your network.
Yes,
and
recruiters.
There's lots of different types of recruiters, but ideally you can have a mix of, freelancers like me, and recruiters that work inside of companies that you might be interested in, in working for someday. So I think a combination of all of the stuff that you guys just mentioned around career services and resume writing, combined with a good network of recruiters, I think that's kind of the stuff you need in your quiver, if you will.
And one of the things interesting about that is I've had a lot of people ask me, because I've been a recruiter, hey, can you help me find a job in this? And I might not be working in that. But there are like executive recruiters, and executive recruiters don't necessarily want to talk to anyone unless you get a referral. And I just learned about this in the last couple of years, because I'm at the executive level, that if I had reached out to an executive recruiter, they'll be like, well, I'm not going to talk to you. But if someone that they know refers me, they're more inclined to have a conversation with me and perhaps market me to their clients. What do you think about that?
That is correct. And I think, that varies depending on both the geography that you're talking about. I found that in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley, people tend to be more open to taking informational calls just to be helpful. But obviously not everyone. If someone's like really high up and or really busy, they're not going to take a random call from someone. But I think you're right. If you get a friend to introduce you to someone like that, they'll usually at least open up their network and take at least a 5-minute call to see if they might be able to be helpful in some way.
And another thing that I think a lot of people don't understand about exec recruiters is that they are hired by a company to find the right person for a job. They're not hired to find you a job, and that's a big difference. So they're maybe working on 6 to 8 routine search assignments at a given time, and Tim can talk more about this. But if you don't fit the bill for the 6 to 8 roles or that type of role, they're going to be less interested in talking to you, even if you've been referred in.
Right, because you're not going to help them make money. I mean, they're getting paid by, not you, but by their client. And so I know there are a lot of services out there that will say, give us $5,000 and we'll help you find a job. What do you think about those?
So I think it really is in the details. Like, what does that mean? Are they claiming to be a placement agency where they are going to actually find you a job? Or is it more a career services firm that's going to help you position yourself to be successful in your search, surface some job opportunities, et cetera? I would hesitate to sign up for that kind of package up front unless there was some additional guarantee around it. And even then, it's all about finding the right job. It's not just about finding any job. So I'm more inclined for individuals who are going to pay out of pocket. I'm more inclined for individuals to tap more specialized resources as needed, i.e., I'm going to hire someone to review my resume, or I'm going to hire someone to help me prep for interviews, things like that, as opposed to I'm hiring someone to find me a job. You ultimately need to own your own job search, so I think it's a little unrealistic to hire someone to find you a job.
And we talked a little bit about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to say I have had a couple of people in my career take the tack that they wanted me to own that, and so it is helpful to explicitly
Tim, I think we lost you.
Your own search.
I'm sorry, Tim, we lost you there. Can you start
And,
from the beginning? Yeah, we couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. So I was just saying that I think that, to Michelle's point, each person has to recognize that they own their own job search. So, I have had a couple of candidates try to put it on me. So over the years, I've learned that it's important to be explicit about that when talking with candidates.
Yeah, I think you're spot on about that. You talked earlier about resumes. So I used a service called Top Resume, and in fact, they were on the show. We did a show on how to write a resume, and it was like $125 or $50, and it was a fantastic service. And being like a professional resume reader, I am not a professional resume writer, but I've written my resume for over and over and over, like, I'm sure hundreds of times. They made a huge difference, and I think you're right. Finding a good service to do the resume, I think, and I'd love to hear what you think, as soon as you get a new job, you should rewrite your resume. What do you think about that, Tim?
Yeah, I definitely think it's good to keep it updated. But I'd say it's even more important to keep your LinkedIn profile updated. What we're seeing over the last few years is that I think resumes are kind of slowly starting to die. They're no longer a required thing. LinkedIn profiles are kind of replacing what used to be the resume.
Really? Have you found companies that are just looking at LinkedIn profiles?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that I do and my team does is we go after people who aren't looking for jobs for startups here in the Bay Area, and we find them on LinkedIn, and we'll send them a pitch and try to engage them in a conversation about a job opportunity. And in most of those cases, people don't even have their resume updated.
Right, because they haven't listened to the show.
That's right.
And Lorne, I have also seen companies where they don't even have a resume for a candidate. So, similar to what Tim described, they reach out to candidates, they pull those candidates in, and then for the interview, they're just printing out the LinkedIn profile for the hiring manager to review. So they're not actually asking the candidate for their resume.
That's kind of weird. Well, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to You're Hired. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein, here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. We'll be back in just a minute. Hi, I'm your host, Lorne Epstein. You're listening to You're Hired, playing here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. If you'd like to listen to us on the radio, we play on Mondays from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on 96.7 FM. If you miss that show, you can always listen to us on the web at mixcloud.com, You're Hired Radio. If you're interested in being on the show, you can give us a call at 240-876-0276. And if you want to follow us on Facebook, go to Facebook and punch in You're Hired Radio. Also, we're on LinkedIn. You can reach me at You're Hired Radio. And I'm in space at You're Hired Radio. Welcome back to the show. We are talking about what now after you've been laid off with my guests, Michelle Vitus and Tim Wenzel. I'm so glad you can join us, Michelle and Tim. You were just saying, Michelle, I didn't want to cut you off before we went to the break.
Yeah, I was saying that I've actually seen some companies that don't even use resumes anymore. So they will print out the candidate's LinkedIn profile and give that to the hiring manager to review in advance of the interview, and they're not even referencing a resume. So it is emerging.
Yeah, one of the things that I've heard now is that, LinkedIn, as a recruiter, if you go on LinkedIn, you can see when people have updated their LinkedIn profiles, and that's a really good indicator of how interested they are in a job. So if folks start a new job and then kind of take our advice of, well, they should update their LinkedIn profile, what should they do? I mean, should they make that public, or should they kind of turn off the notifications? How would they kind of do that without kind of making anyone aware of they're looking for a job? Or does it matter?
Yes. So if you just started a job, I do think, again, it's good to update it and put your current employer on there. I personally would never turn off notifications, even if you don't think you would consider, changing jobs. It's always good to network. But you can indicate on LinkedIn that you're not currently looking, right? Because I think one of the things that appears on your profile is currently active in the job market.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as that's turned off, I think everything's going to be fine.
But then I'll get called by folks like you who are looking for people who aren't looking.
You're welcome to ignore me, right? Or just send me a polite no thank you.
I gotcha.
I do think it's really important to be aware of LinkedIn privacy settings, though. So it's not just broadcasting changes to your profile. There are also settings around, that you've added new connections and things like that. So let's say you haven't left your prior job and you're making a whole bunch of changes to your profile. Some candidates may feel some sensitivity around that, and you might not want that to be broadcast to the public. You might want to only turn that back on once you land your next gig. And a funny story from an advisor of mine, Steve Cadigan, who's a former VP of talent at LinkedIn. He tells a story of when he was applying for the role to lead talent at LinkedIn. He went and he interviewed with the whole exec team over there. And afterward, he went back and added them as connections, each person from the exec team. And the way that his privacy settings were set up back then and the way that the broadcasting was set up back then, his existing boss could see that he had just added the entire LinkedIn exec team as connections and said, hey, looks like you're applying for a role over at LinkedIn. So there's certainly a benefit to being aware of what is being broadcast and adjusting accordingly.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because I get this question a lot. People are worried that their boss is going to know that they're leaving. Does that make sense? I mean, I've never thought of that as making sense, because, if your boss wants you to leave, then fine. And if they don't want you to leave, they'll come and try and keep you.
I completely agree, and obviously it depends on the nature of your boss. I believe the best bosses will set a tone that makes the employee actually feel comfortable being more open about their long-term career goals. I even had a boss. I had the best boss I ever had was my boss at PayPal for 7 years, and he would occasionally come to me with job opportunities. He'd say, "Look, Tim, I don't want you to leave, but this came across my desk, and it might be something worth looking at." In fact, that's how I got my job at Tesla Motors, was through my boss's recommendation.
Wow, that's a great boss.
Yeah,
and I'm sure that person is still in your network.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I have gotten most of the work I've gotten through my network, and so when you guys were talking earlier about networking, and I hate that word networking. I kind of like to use friend making. Or some iteration of like, hey, we're just going to get to know each other. I find that to be the most potent resource. And then I can email people, or I can call them up and say, hey, I'm looking for a job, just letting you know. What's your advice around that?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is it's good to keep it somewhat informal. And I would agree with that. And I feel like the people that are most likely to be willing to help you is someone that's also going to be a friend, right? It's not just going to be someone who you didn't have any kind of rapport with. And so I think that those are going to be the people that are most likely to bear fruit on your search.
Okay, well, I'm letting all of my listeners know sometime in October, November, I'm going to need another gig. So.
All right. It's a big announcement.
Yeah, the work I'm working on is ending I think we got like 4 months or 5 months, and then it's going to go away. So I'm making this bold statement, kind of, I hope maybe not quite taking your advice, because I don't know all my listeners, but the ones that I know, listen, you know who I'm talking about. Huh?
You're giving notice on the air.
I'm giving notice on the air. If my team's listening, oh boy.
Everyone's walking out.
They all know, though. They all know that at some point this project is going to.
I would add, so I agree with Tim that it's those close connections that are your strongest advocates. But I would also add that you shouldn't rule out that next layer of connection either. So an example of that would be the alum connections that you might have. So potentially people you don't even know who are alums from the same school, and reaching out to them if they're at a company that's of interest to you and saying, hey, would love to grab coffee and learn more about your experience working at this company. I'm interested in exploring it. And even if they're not directly hiring for a job that's relevant to your skill set, they can help open doors for you. And it's a very easy way to expand beyond your core network of the close circle folks that you know well.
Tim, let me ask you, it's great advice, Michelle. Timmy, let me ask you, because you've worked at some amazing companies, eBay, PayPal, Tesla. How would somebody get a job at a company like that if they wanted to? Should they go through the front door, or should they go through the back door? Or what would be the best advice you'd give to them? And you've seen a lot of people get hired at these places.
Yeah, I mean, if you go and do a survey, most people that get hired, especially in these high-tech companies, they go through someone in their network, usually a friend or a former colleague that is currently employed by that company, and that person forwards the resume either to a recruiter inside the company or to the hiring team. It's a very small percentage of people that get hired that just apply on the website. It's just I think it's pretty well known now that tends to be a black hole, and in many cases you'll get ignored even if you're a very qualified candidate. So employee referrals, I believe were at PayPal, I think it was about 35% of our hires came through employee referrals.
Yeah, that's really high. When I was at the last software company, I led talent acquisition. We were at 43%. So Jerry Crispin, who is a leader in our industry, is on a show, and he was saying that, and this is data that he's collected from large companies, you're 300 times, not percent, 300 times more likely to be hired if you know somebody within the company and get a referral.
I believe it.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So what we're talking about here really is kind of the way to get a job. I mean, you're not going to get a job by just submitting your resumes. I mean, just like employers who post jobs and pray for people to apply, posting your resume and hoping you're going to get an interview is not very likely to happen.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's good to know. So, what else can someone do to get into some of these companies? What are some of the other, edge cases or other unique methods?
I think become a student of the products and actually use the products and services. I would always get really annoyed, as with the hiring managers at PayPal, when a candidate would come in for an interview that didn't even have a PayPal account, right? So show some interest, show some passion in whatever the business is with the companies that they stand for, and understand their culture, research their culture and understand their mission and vision, and come in with some knowledge and ask some really smart questions.
So I guess flipping the question, maybe what you're saying is, if I'm working, one of the ways I can prepare for a layoff is to find a company that I'd like to work at next.
Yes.
And start
put together
that process.
a target list of companies that you're interested in.
Put together,
and
so
try to make friends at those companies.
Right. So I'm gainfully employed. Life is going good. And I've got all this runway. I can start checking out people at PayPal or people at Amazon that I'm really interested in. Who do I know in my network? And now, what if I don't know it? If I don't have a network, what if it's just me? I'm just out of college. I got nobody.
That's where I think the alumni network comes in very strongly, in that you're straight out of college. You're going to have alums at a whole bunch of companies who are going to be pretty open to talking with you, and I think sympathetic to the fact that you're straight out of school and will have a desire to help. So I think that's a big way to expand your target pool of connections.
Tim, you were going to add?
Yeah, I would just add to that. It's also good for students to try to start building their networks while they're in college. It was just a few years ago that college kids didn't do that, but that's changing. So if you spend some of your time, in your off time, working on that, and then try to get some internship experience under your belt, and that'll help organically grow your network.
Yeah. Now, what about people? It's getting so old. People who don't go to college.
Yeah, I mean, the principles are still the same.
Uh-huh.
But it's obviously a different type of job that most non-college graduates are going to be qualified for.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding is that some of those jobs, some of the recruiters involved in those jobs are not as active on LinkedIn. So I think there might be a little bit more, traditional or offline job search activities to be done in those cases.
Well, the things that we've talked about, and I think it's really good, just kind of recapping, is to, once you get your next job, or if you're in your next job right now, is to save up enough money so you could weather a storm, work on your resume, work on your LinkedIn profile, work on your skills training, start to expand, to learn new things, and be prepared for the next job change, because we all know that's coming, right? The days of people being in the same job for 20 and 30 years are falling away. And also to continue to make friends and keep building those relationships with the friends that you have. Are there any other things that maybe we haven't captured around? Oh, and then you said we talked about alumni, and I had mentioned local government and meetups. Anything else that you could think of that the listeners could do to kind of get ready for when that happens?
Yeah, it's super important to know what you want to pursue next. So I've run into a number of job seekers who say, well, I'm really open to anything, or I can do anything.
Yeah.
And while that might sound like it would expand your opportunity set, it actually slows down your search, because people don't know what to do with someone who's open to anything. And you come across as unfocused and not having a deep skill set in any one area. So I think it's important to really hone in on what do you want to pursue next, and be able to articulate that when you talk with people.
That's good advice. So I want you to give me kind of the play-by-play of the moment of, right? So think about it. It's Tuesday afternoon, it's 4:00, and all of a sudden, you feel the energy's kind of weird. Your boss comes to you and says, hey, I'm really sorry, but you're getting laid off. What are like the next 5 things that you should do, like right then?
Take a deep breath, stay professional, never, try not to let your emotions get the best of you, and go home early and try to relax and just let it process. And like Michelle said earlier, everyone processes these things differently.
Okay, so don't do anything other than take a deep breath, go home, and process all the feelings that you're having about this and all the emotions.
That's right.
I will add, if it's a group, it is often super helpful to go grab a beer with the rest of the team or go out to lunch. That sense of camaraderie, if there's a larger group that's being let go, can be really powerful. So I've been present at several layoffs where an entire office is being closed down, and that hurts. But they're all in it together. And so going out and just being able to support each other is a great way to spend the afternoon.
So then you go home, you break the news to your family, and then what do you do?
So then you got to decide how much of a breather you want to take. So some people will decide to just lay low for a week and not dive into dusting off the resume and updating the LinkedIn profile, and that's fine. Other people will actually find it's helpful for them to feel like they're taking steps moving forward right away. And if you're going to take steps moving forward right away, I would encourage you to do steps that are not external facing. Update that resume and that LinkedIn profile. Don't go directly to a job interview. Take a little more time before you hop straight into the job interview. Make sure, like I talked about before, that you're able to distance yourself a little bit from the emotion of the layoff event before you hop into the job interviews. And then there's also the logistical stuff. So you're going to have to figure out what your family is going to do for health insurance. How long is your employer sponsoring continued health insurance coverage? What are you going to do financially? How much cash runway do you have? So there's some practical stuff that gets in there too.
Yeah, what I recommend to folks to do is, as soon as that happens, one thing they can do is apply for unemployment. Because even if you're not on it for very long, it takes a little while, and just get going.
Yeah.
And the other thing on COBRA, which is the Consolidated Omnibus Reconciliation Act, which allows you to get the same coverage from your employer, but just paying the full freight, is something that they're obliged to tell you. So as long as they have over 50 employees, they have to provide this service for 18 months, right? Now, there's the exchanges and all the other opportunities for now, but the COBRA opportunity is something that any employer over 50 people has, and they will send you a letter and offer you the insurance. I want to actually talk about this for a second because it's something that most people don't understand. As soon as if it's, let's say, May 15th and your insurance ends at the end of the month, on June 1st, you are technically covered under the COBRA insurance that you would buy, even if you haven't bought it yet. And you have like a month or two. So once you buy it, you're covered backwards. So let's say it was June 10th and you had an event. As long as once you get the paperwork from the administrator of the COBRA plan, you're then covered for your insurance going forward. You have to pay for it, obviously, and it's, it could be expensive. It's what the employer would normally have paid, but then at least you're covered. Did either of you wanted to add to that? Because I think it's really important for people to know about, particularly in this day and age of health insurance expenses.
Yeah, a lot of people
I think you
articulated
that very well.
I'm sorry, hang on.
Right.
You're both
Most
talking.
no
Michelle, hold on a second.
Tim,
Tim, can you just repeat that because you guys were talking
Sure.
over?
So I was just going to say you did a great job of describing that process, and I've laid off a lot of people, and most of them had no clue how that stuff worked until you walk them through it.
Yeah, right. Good. Well, so we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. My name's Lorne Epstein. You're listening to You're Hired on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to You're Hired on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein. Thanks for listening to our show. If you're interested in getting on the show, you can give me a call at 240-876-0276 or follow us on Facebook at You're Hired. And you can join my meetup where we teach interview skills at interviewskillstogetthejob@meetup.com. Again, I'm your host, Lorne Epstein. You're listening to You're Hired on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. Welcome back. You're listening to You're Hired. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein, here on You're Hired, 96.7 FM. With me today is Michelle Vitus and Tim Wenzel. We're talking about what to do when you get laid off. And we were just kind of commenting on kind of the health insurance component, that when you're laid off from a company over 50 people, there is the opportunity to get COBRA, which is the continuation of your current health insurance. Michelle, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so what I was going to add is that a lot of people are surprised at how high the COBRA premium is. It is, as you described, the full price of what the company was paying for your health insurance. So if they have a rich plan, it could be $700 a month for a healthy individual. So sometimes it can make more sense for you to get a private health insurance plan. Just want to raise that there are options. You don't have to opt in for the COBRA plan. You can also go to the health insurance exchanges and private health plans.
Yeah, I know for me and my wife, it's over $1,200 a month that we pay for our insurance, which is quite a bit.
Yeah.
So after the layoff, applying for unemployment, making sure that your insurance is taken care of, then there's that lull. We've talked about that lull of like, what do you do, right? So it sounds like the best advice is don't do anything facing outward to companies until you are really kind of ready, right? And that ready is something that everyone has their own personal, I'm ready.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so now you're ready. Now what do you do?
Now, one thing that I think is really important, especially for people who have limited experience interviewing, is to really sharpen your interview skills. Sit down and think back about your accomplishments. What are some key projects that you were involved in that you're proud of? How did you add value? And try to come up with some behavioral interview questions that you might encounter in your interviews, and try to get comfortable, speaking concisely and clearly about where you've been and what you've done.
Yeah, I teach an interview skills workshop, and my biggest leverage is when people practice interviewing. If they just practice. So it sounds like this would be a great time to start practice interviewing, either with a friend or with a local group that supports this kind of activity. I know here in Virginia, we have McLean Bible Church that has every Tuesday night, they have all sorts of resources on interview skills and how to use LinkedIn. So really kind of start getting plugged in is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
And getting ready for the interview. So have your resume ready. What else would you say?
I would say look beyond the obvious. So by going beyond big name companies that are just top of mind, you will expand your options and face less competition. So put together a target company list and do some research. Out here in Silicon Valley, people are like, I want to work for Google, Apple, Facebook, Uber, or whatever. Maybe Uber's fallen out of favor for some, but don't just limit yourself to the companies that are big name, well-recognized firms. Dig a little deeper to see what smaller firms or mid-sized firms might also be of interest to you.
And I'd find them in articles in my field, or how would I figure that out?
Yeah. So finding small and mid-sized companies, it really depends on the type of companies that you're targeting. So you can find them in articles, as you mentioned, industry publications, etc. You can also find them in databases if you want to search by particular industries or sub-industries. There's a number of corporate databases that have that. On the startup side, you can look at who's getting funded. So where are the VC dollars going? Where there are VC dollars going, there's likely going to be some hiring. And those are firms that are small and mid-sized typically. So lots of different ways to bubble up potential.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So you guys are out in Silicon Valley. Are there any industries or places we should be looking for new jobs, given the money? Where's it going?
So TechCrunch. So there's a number of online high-tech media websites where you can kind of figure out, again, like Michelle said, where are the VC dollars going, which companies are coming out with some innovative products, what are the hot spaces. Also, most of these venture capital firms have their own websites, and they will list all of their portfolio companies right there on the website, and then you can usually click through and quickly do research on those companies and figure out, okay, which ones kind of catch your eye, and get smart about researching their product or service, as well as starting to reach out on LinkedIn or the people in your network to get you connected to those companies of interest.
Well, that's a great idea. Find a really good venture capital firm or place that is investing and see what companies that they're funding. That's probably a really good metric of how well they'll be successful, of how successful they'll be. Excuse me.
And there's also a lot of the big VCs will have kind of an internal recruiting team. They're usually called human capitalists. So if you can get introduced to those folks, those guys usually have direct relationships with the founders of their portfolio companies. So those can be great people to know as well.
And are they recruiting for all the positions in a company or just the executive level?
Usually it's just the executive, but usually that role is they'll go spend time inside the portfolio companies and kind of coach the founders on how to build a good recruiting process. But they're not usually running all of the searches for them because it'd be too many.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's still a great resource. Anything else did you want to add on that, Michelle?
Another resource for finding startup funding is Crunchbase. So the word crunch and base, and the website will show latest rounds of startup funding. You can also subscribe to get updates on rounds on a regular basis. So another tool to surface where the dollars are going.
Cool. And what about updating our resume on like Monster and Career Builder and those places?
My experience has been that that's less relevant. It's more relevant to update your LinkedIn profile, and the recruiters will find you there instead of the traditional job boards.
So you really think the recruiters are running away from the Monsters and the Career Builders?
Tim, what do you think?
In high tech, that's absolutely correct. I believe that in some of the sort of low tech, if you will, or blue collar type jobs, in Middle America, I believe Monster and Career Builder are still quite relevant.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good advice. Well, we're just about running out of time. Is there any other parting words of wisdom you'd like to share with us, Michelle?
Yeah, be ready for your next social event. So inevitably someone will ask, so what do you do? And if you're between jobs, be ready with an answer and speak to your background, the type of role you're pursuing. Don't apologize for being unemployed.
Yeah, that's great advice. Tim, anything you wanted to end with?
I would just say always try to stay positive and optimistic. Even if you do get laid off, don't let it get you down. Don't take it personal. It's a business thing. But also,
oh, sorry, you cut out there. You said you cut out. Can you repeat that?
Oh yeah, sorry. So I was just saying that it's good to ask for feedback after you get laid off from people that you worked with, and just try to stay positive and keep your chin up as you go into your next career phase.
That's great advice. I would agree with that. And how can folks reach you, Tim, if they want to?
So on our website, which is the alistgroup.com, and list is spelled with a Y, and my email address is just tim@thealistgroup.com.
So that's ALYSTGROUP.
That's correct.
Great. And Michelle, how can folks reach you?
LinkedIn is the best way. It's Michelle Vitus, Vitus.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both for being on the show and giving us some incredible advice on what to do in case we get laid off or, I guess, fired or otherwise without a job. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. You're listening to You're Hired. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein. You're listening to 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. We'll see you next week on another episode of You're Hired.